Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it echoes through the laughter of 3 innocent children on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. Billionaire Vivian Croft thought she had buried her heart along with her late fiancé 8 years ago. But seeing him alive, catching a little girl in his arms, changed everything. Vivian Croft, the 34-year-old CEO of Aura Innovations, was a woman carved from ice and ambition. Forbes called her the architect of the future, a self-made billionaire with a net worth hovering around $4.2 billion. She wore tailored Tom Ford suits like armor, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, unforgiving chignon, her emerald eyes calculating the exact value of every person in the room. Just 20 minutes earlier, inside the mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Plaza Hotel, she had relentlessly dismantled a rival tech conglomerate, acquiring their assets for pennies on the dollar. She was powerful, untouchable, and profoundly, suffocatingly alone. To burn off the adrenaline of the corporate slaughter, Vivian insisted on walking back to her Midtown headquarters through Central Park. Her executive assistant, Bridget, hurried beside her, furiously typing on an iPad, while Silas, the head of her private security detail, maintained a discreet but watchful distance 3 paces behind. The air was crisp that April afternoon, carrying the scent of blooming cherry blossoms and roasted peanuts. Bethesda Terrace was alive with tourists, street performers, and the chaotic hum of New York City. Vivian barely noticed the scenery. Her mind was already on the next quarter's projections, her heart locked in the impenetrable vault she had built 8 years ago. Then, the acoustic guitarist playing near the fountain struck a familiar chord, an old Fleetwood Mac song. Vivian instinctively turned her head toward the sound, and the world simply stopped spinning. Time distorted. The ambient noise of the crowd faded into a dull, rushing static in her ears. 20 yards away, standing near a pretzel cart, was a man in a worn corduroy jacket. His back was to her, but Vivian didn't need to see his face. She knew the slope of those shoulders. She knew the way he nervously ran a hand through his thick, sandy blonde hair. It was Arthur Sterling, the man who had proposed to her on a rainy Tuesday in Seattle, slipping a modest, lab-grown diamond onto her finger because they were both broke and surviving on ramen noodles. The man whose car was found abandoned on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge 8 years ago, along with a devastating, rain-smeared suicide note citing his crippling depression. The man she had mourned until her tears ran dry and her soul turned to titanium. Vivian's breath hitched, a sharp, painful gasp that felt like swallowing glass. She froze in her tracks, her manicured nails digging into the leather of her Hermes Birkin bag. "Ms. Croft?" Bridget asked, looking up from her screen, immediately sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. "Are you all right? You've gone completely pale." Silas was instantly at Vivian's side, his hand hovering over his earpiece, his eyes scanning the crowd for a threat. "Boss, talk to me." "Don't move," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling a sound Silas had never heard from his stoic employer. She stepped behind the thick stone pillar of the terrace arches, concealing herself in the shadows while keeping her eyes locked on the pretzel cart. "Just give me a second." The man turned slightly to hand a $5 bill to the vendor. It was him. Older, certainly. There were fine lines framing his eyes now, and a neatly trimmed beard shadowed his jawline, but it was unmistakably Arthur. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't rotting at the bottom of the Puget Sound. He was standing in Central Park, breathing, smiling, and buying snacks. Vivian felt a violently physical reaction, A wave of profound nausea washed over her, followed instantly by a surge of white-hot, blinding adrenaline. He was alive. For 8 years, she had visited an empty grave. She had built her empire on the ashes of her grief, convincing herself she had failed to save the only man she ever loved. Before she could process the betrayal, the scene in front of her shattered what little remained of her composure. "Dad, did you get the ones with the salt?" A young boy, no older than 7, with unruly dark hair and bright, expressive eyes, barreled into Arthur's legs. He was wearing a miniature Yankees jacket and a toothy, mischievous grin. Arthur chuckled that deep, resonant laugh that used to vibrate against Vivian's chest when they lay in bed. He ruffled the boy's hair. "Yes. Leo. Extra salt, just the way you like it." "Daddy." "Me too. 2 smaller children, boy and girl twins who looked to be around 4 years old, waddled over as fast as their little legs could carry them." Arthur dropped to one knee, catching the little girl in his left arm and the younger boy in his right. He kissed the tops of their heads. 3 kids. 3 children calling him Dad. Vivian pressed her back against the cold stone of the archway, her chest heaving. Dad. The word echoed in her mind, toxic and surreal. Arthur and Vivian had tried so hard to have children. They had spent their meager savings on fertility treatments that had ended in quiet, tearful disappointments. He had died leaving her with nothing but debts and shattered dreams. Now, he was playing father to 3 beautiful children. A woman walked into Vivian's line of sight. She was beautiful in an effortless, understated way, blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail, wearing Lululemon leggings and a denim jacket. She handed Arthur a paper cup of coffee and leaned down to kiss him softly on the lips. Arthur looked at her with such profound, unburdened adoration that it felt like a physical blow to Vivian's ribs. "Got the coffee, babe," the woman said, her voice carrying over the pavement. "Let's get these monsters to the zoo before Leo throws a tantrum." "You heard your mother," Arthur said, standing up and grabbing the twins' hands. To the zoo. Vivian watched the perfect, picturesque family walk away, disappearing into the vibrant throngs of tourists. She didn't scream. She didn't run after him. The sheer magnitude of the shock had triggered her deepest, most ingrained survival mechanism, utter detachment. The heartbroken young woman from Seattle vanished, completely replaced by the ruthless, calculating CEO of Aura Innovations. "Silas," Vivian said, her voice suddenly devoid of all emotion. It was the voice that had terrified Wall Street veterans. "Yes." "Miss Croft. I need the car pulled around, immediately." She stepped out from the shadows, her eyes locked on the spot where Arthur had just been standing. "And Bridget." "Yes, Vivian." Bridget replied, visibly terrified by the absolute deadness in her boss's eyes. "Cancel the rest of my week, clear the schedule entirely, and get Simon Caldwell on a secure line by the time I reach the penthouse." The penthouse at 432 Park Avenue was a masterpiece of modern minimalism, floating above the clouds of Manhattan. Usually, the sweeping views of the city skyline offered Vivian a sense of control and peace. Tonight, the glittering lights below just looked like a million tiny fires. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, nursing a glass of 20-year-old Macallan, the amber liquid burning a slow trail down her throat. The apartment was dead silent, save for the faint hum of the city hundreds of feet below. The private elevator chimed, breaking the stillness. Simon Caldwell stepped into the foyer. Simon wasn't just a private investigator. He was an apex predator in the world of corporate intelligence. A former operative for British intelligence, he now exclusively handled the illicit, the buried, and the heavily guarded secrets of the ultra-wealthy. He wore a sharp grey suit and carried a thick leather briefcase. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Vivian," Simon said, dropping his briefcase onto the sprawling marble kitchen island. "I have," Vivian replied, not turning away from the window. "I need you to hunt him. Over the next 48 hours. Vivian transformed her luxury apartment into a war room. She barely slept, fueling herself on black coffee and sheer, unadulterated rage. She didn't cry. Crying was for victims, and Vivian Croft had long ago decided she would never be a victim again. On Thursday evening, Simon returned. The atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with tension. He didn't offer a polite greeting. He simply opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick dossier, sliding it across the marble counter toward her. "You weren't hallucinating," Simon began, his tone gravely serious. "His name is no longer Arthur Sterling. According to the United States government, Arthur Sterling is deceased. The man you saw in the park is legally named Daniel Lawson." Vivian opened the file. The first page was a high-resolution surveillance photo of Arthur Daniel sitting on a park bench, the woman from Central Park resting her head on his shoulder. "The woman is Rachel Lawson," Simon continued, pacing the length of the kitchen. "They reside in a beautifully renovated brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn. He owns a boutique architectural firm. She is a freelance graphic designer. They've been legally married for 7 years. 7 years. Vivian did the brutal math in her head. Arthur had disappeared 8 years and 2 months ago. He had married this woman scarcely a year after faking his own suicide. "Why?" Vivian asked, her voice cracking slightly, betraying the ice she was trying to project. "Did he do it for money? Was he running from debt?" "No," Simon said, stopping his pacing to look her dead in the eye. "He was running from your former employer, and he was running with the help of the federal government." Vivian frowned, her sharp mind immediately pivoting. "Bancroft Financial. I left them to start Aura. They were a standard venture capital firm." "They were a front," Simon corrected. "Shortly after you left, the FBI began quietly investigating Bancroft for laundering money for the Sinaloa cartel. Arthur, working in their accounting department, stumbled onto the ledgers. He became a confidential informant for the feds. But he made a mistake. He downloaded the files onto an unsecured server. The cartel found out." Vivian's breath hitched. "They were going to kill him." "They were going to kill both of you," Simon corrected softly. "The U.S. Marshals offered him a deal. Enter the witness security program immediately. But he couldn't take you. You weren't legally married, and pulling a rising tech founder into WITSEC would have drawn too much attention. The cartel would have tracked you. So, to protect you, Arthur had to die. He wrote the note, abandoned the car, and let you grieve so you would survive." Vivian stared at the dossier, a complex hurricane of emotions threatening to tear her apart. A part of her, the broken girl from Seattle, felt a profound, tragic relief. He hadn't stopped loving her. He hadn't abandoned her out of malice. He had sacrificed his life, his identity, to keep her safe. But the billionaire CEO inside her, the woman who had learned to scrutinize every detail, spotted the flaw in the narrative. "That explains the fake death," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, low timbre. "That explains Daniel Lawson, It explains Rachel, but it doesn't explain the timeline. Simon, look at these children. She tapped a glossy photograph of the kids. The twins are roughly 4, but the oldest boy, Leo, I heard Arthur say his name. I looked at him. Simon. The boy is at least 7 years old. If Arthur married Rachel 7 years ago, they must have conceived immediately. A fast recovery for a grieving man. Simon's face tightened. He looked visibly uncomfortable, a rarity for the hardened investigator. He reached into the dossier and pulled out a separate, red-tabbed folder. Vivian, I need you to sit down. I prefer to stand. Speak. Simon sighed, opening the red folder. I dug into the medical backgrounds. When Arthur entered WITSEC, he underwent a full federal medical evaluation. I managed to acquire the heavily classified records. Vivian, Arthur had severe varicocele complications in his late 20s. The condition worsened over time. By the time he entered WITSEC, it was absolute. Arthur Sterling is entirely, irreparably sterile. Vivian froze. The words hung in the air, disjointed and nonsensical. Sterile, but we were doing IVF. We had embryos. Exactly, Simon said quietly. Rachel Lawson gave birth to the twins 4 years ago. But Arthur isn't their biological father. They used a sperm donor. However, Leo is different. Simon slid a certified, heavily redacted legal document across the table. It was a birth certificate from the state of New York. The child's name was Leo Lawson, mother Rachel Lawson, father Daniel Lawson. It took me calling in every favor I had at the NSA to unseal the actual biological records tied to Leo's birth, Simon explained, his voice thick with apprehension. Rachel Lawson did not give birth to Leo. She is legally his mother via a closed adoption, facilitated by the U.S. Marshals. Vivian's hands began to shake. She looked at the photograph of the boy again. The unruly dark hair, the bright, expressive green eyes. She had thought she was projecting, seeing ghosts of herself in a stranger's child because of her own grief. Simon, Vivian whispered, the realization hitting her like a freight train, knocking the air from her lungs. Whose child is that? 8 years ago, right before Arthur vanished, you two had successfully created 3 viable embryos at the Seattle Fertility Institute, Simon said, delivering the facts with brutal precision. After Arthur's death, you fell into a severe depression. You stopped answering the clinic's calls. You abandoned the storage fees. You completely shut down. Vivian clutched the edge of the marble island to keep from collapsing. She remembered the suffocating darkness of those months. She had barely been able to feed herself, let alone deal with the agonizing reminder of the children she and Arthur would never have. 2 months into his time in WITSEC, Simon continued, Arthur utilized a loophole and a forged signature. Your signature, Vivian. He petitioned the clinic to release the embryos to a secure medical courier, claiming you had mutually agreed to transfer them to a long-term storage facility on the East Coast. Because of his federal backing, the paperwork sailed through without raising red flags. He stole them. A single tear broke free, tracking down Vivienne's cheek, ruining her perfect makeup. He and Rachel hired a surrogate, Simon finished, his voice a grim whisper. Only 1 embryo survived the thawing and implantation process. Leo. Vivian stared at the photograph of the laughing 7-year-old boy in the Yankees jacket. The boy who had her eyes. The boy who shared her blood, her DNA. The son she never knew she had, stolen from the frozen purgatory of a Seattle clinic and raised by a woman who had simply taken Vivian's place. Arthur hadn't just faked his death to protect her. He had systematically erased her from her own future, hijacking the family they had built together in a test tube and handed it to another woman. He had left Vivian with an empty grave, while he walked away with her biological son. The sadness evaporated, instantly incinerated by a rage so pure, so absolute. It felt divine. Vivian Croft stood up straight, wiping the single tear from her cheek. She closed the dossier, the sound of the cardboard snapping shut, echoing like a gunshot in the silent penthouse. "Simon," Vivian said, her voice now a weapon of mass destruction. "I want to buy his architectural firm. I want to buy the building he lives in. And I want the best family litigator in the hemisphere in my office by 8 a.m. She looked down at the smiling face of the man who had ruined her, and then at the son who was rightfully hers. He thinks he knows how to disappear. Let's see how he handles being erased. The hostile takeover of Daniel Lawson's life didn't happen with a shout. It happened with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a corporate spreadsheet. Vivian didn't sleep for the next 4 days. She weaponized her grief, channeling every ounce of her broken heart into a masterclass of destruction. Arthur's boutique architectural firm, Harrison and Reed, was a prestigious but financially vulnerable company in Soho. By Tuesday morning, an anonymous shell corporation operating under the Aura Innovations umbrella had aggressively bought out the firm's aging founders, acquiring a controlling 80% stake, simultaneously. Simon Caldwell had traced the mortgage of the Park Slope brownstone. It was held by a mid-sized regional bank. Vivian simply bought the debt, transferring the deed to her own private asset portfolio. Within 96 hours of spotting him in Central Park, Vivian Croft owned the roof over Arthur's head and the desk where he earned his living. On Thursday afternoon, a sleek, black Maybach pulled up to the curb outside Harrison and Reed. Silas stepped out first, scanning the bustling Soho street before opening the door for Vivian. She stepped onto the pavement, wearing a charcoal Alexander McQueen suit that looked less like business attire and more like armor. She bypassed the receptionist, her sheer presence demanding absolute silence from the bewildered staff. Silas flanked her, opening the heavy glass doors to the senior partner's suite. Arthur was standing over a drafting table, his sleeves rolled up, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He was laughing on the phone with someone. "Yeah, Rach. I'll pick up the twins after my meeting with the new owners. Love you too." He hung up. He turned around. The pencil fell from behind his ear, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking exactly like the corpse Vivian had mourned for 8 years. He stumbled backward, his hip crashing into the edge of the drafting table. "Hello, Daniel," Vivian said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, devoid of the screaming rage he likely expected. She walked over to a leather armchair and sat down, crossing her legs. "Or do you prefer Arthur? It's hard to keep track of the dead." "Vivian," Arthur choked out, his hands trembling violently. How did you?" "Find you." She tilted her head. "You bought a pretzel in Central Park. Arthur, you always were sloppy with cash. But don't worry. I know all about the Sinaloa cartel. I know about the unsecured servers at Bancroft Financial. I know about the witness security program and your tragic, noble sacrifice to keep me safe." Arthur let out a shuddering breath, tears immediately pooling in his eyes. He took a step toward her, his hands raised in a plea. "Vivian, you have to understand. They were going to kill you. The feds said, if I brought you with me, the cartel would trace you. I had to make a clean break. I died so you could live. Every single day. I hated myself for what I put you through. I never stopped loving you. Stop, Vivian commanded, raising a single, manicured finger. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this was an act of chivalry. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out the thick red folder Simon had compiled. She tossed it onto his drafting table. The glossy photo of 7-year-old Leo slid out, stopping inches from Arthur's trembling hands. "You died to protect me," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "But you forged my signature on federal medical release forms to steal my unborn child out of a freezer in Seattle. You took my son, Arthur." Arthur flinched, as if he had been struck with a baseball bat. He looked at the photo of Leo, then back at Vivian. The facade of the brave, protective martyr crumbled, replaced by the panicked desperation of a cornered thief. I was empty. "Viv," Arthur pleaded, his voice cracking. "I lost my entire life. I lost you. I was sitting in a safe house in Ohio, realizing I was sterile, realizing I would never have a family, never have a piece of the future we planned. I just wanted a piece of us. I thought you would move on. I thought you would find someone else and have children naturally. Leo is all I have of you. He is not yours to have." Vivian finally raised her voice, the sound echoing sharply off the glass walls. "You abandoned me to a grief so profound, I nearly followed you off that bridge. You let me visit an empty grave for 8 years, while you hired a surrogate and played house with another woman using my flesh and blood. You stole my child to comfort yourself." Arthur backed away, shaking his head. "You can't do anything. I'm protected by the federal government. I'm in WITSEC. If you try to expose me, the cartel will find me. They'll kill me. Vivian, they'll kill my family." Vivian stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. She looked at him not with hatred, but with absolute disgust. "Your federal immunity protects you from the cartel," Vivian said coldly. "It does not protect you from me. As of this morning, Aura Holdings is the majority owner of this firm. You are fired, effectively immediately. Furthermore, the deed to your Brooklyn brownstone is held by my private trust. You have a 30-day eviction notice waiting in your mailbox." Arthur's eyes widened in sheer, suffocating horror. You can't do that. You're destroying my family." "I haven't even started," Vivian promised. "Rachel doesn't know. Does she? She doesn't know she's raising a stolen child." "Don't you dare touch Rachel," Arthur shouted, lunging forward. Silas was there in a microsecond, his massive hand clamping around Arthur's throat, shoving the architect roughly against the drywall. "Hands to yourself, Mr. Lawson," Silas rumbled. Vivian didn't even blink. "Rachel is a victim of your pathological cowardice, just like I was. But unlike you, I don't hide in the shadows." She turned toward the door. "I'll see you in court, Arthur. Tell your federal handlers to bring a very big checkbook." The legal war that followed was unprecedented in the history of the New York family court system. When the U.S. Marshals caught wind that one of their protected witnesses was being targeted, they attempted to throw a federal blanket over the proceedings. They sent 2 grim-faced agents to Aura Innovations, threatening Vivian with obstruction of justice and federal endangerment charges. Vivian had received them in her boardroom, flanked by 4 of the most ruthless litigators on the eastern seaboard. "Here is the reality of your situation, gentlemen," Vivian had told the agents, sliding a meticulously drafted press release across the mahogany table. Arthur Sterling committed interstate wire fraud and medical theft after he was placed in your custody. He used forged documents to steal biological material across state lines. If you attempt to block my custody suit, this press release goes to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and CNN. It details exactly how the U.S. Marshals facilitated the theft of a child for a cartel informant. Your program will be humiliated, subjected to congressional hearings, and dismantled. The agents had stared at her, realizing they were outgunned. You'd expose him to the cartel, one agent asked. I don't care about the cartel, Vivian replied. Deadpan. I care about my son. Stand down, or I burn your entire agency to the ground. The marshals withdrew. The federal shield protecting Arthur evaporated, leaving him entirely exposed to the wrath of Vivian Croft. But the final, fatal blow didn't come from Vivian's lawyers. It came from inside Arthur's own house. 3 days after the confrontation in the office, Rachel Lawson found a manila envelope on her doorstep. Inside were the sealed Seattle Fertility Institute records, the forged consent forms, and a DNA profile proving Vivian Croft was Leo's biological mother. Rachel, a woman who had built her entire life on the foundation of Daniel Lawson's honesty, confronted her husband. When Arthur tearfully confessed to the truth that their eldest son was stolen from his dead ex-fiancé, Rachel was violently repulsed. The man she loved was a phantom, a fraud who had used her as a vessel to play out a stolen fantasy. That same night, Rachel packed her bags, took the 4-year-old twins, and moved in with her sister in Connecticut. She filed for divorce the next morning, citing irreconcilable differences and fraud, and agreed to testify on Vivian's behalf in the custody hearing. Arthur was utterly broken, unemployed, facing eviction, abandoned by his wife, and staring down federal forgery charges. He had no resources left to fight a billionaire. The custody hearing was closed to the public, heavily guarded, and brutal. Arthur sat at the defendant's table looking hollowed out, wearing a cheap suit, his eyes red and sunken. Vivian sat across the aisle, immaculate, unreadable, and victorious. When the judge pounded the gavel, stripping Arthur of his parental rights and granting Vivian full physical and legal custody of Leo, Arthur finally broke down, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. Vivian felt no joy, no triumph, only a heavy, sobering finality. The ghost of Arthur Sterling was finally, truly dead. 2 months later, Central Park was awash in the golden hues of late summer. The air was warm, and the pathways were crowded with families. Vivian sat on a park bench near the Bethesda fountain. She wore a simple cashmere sweater and jeans no armor required today. Beside her sat Leo. He was eating a pretzel, his legs swinging back and forth over the edge of the bench. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been tears, child psychologists, and deeply confusing conversations. But Leo was resilient. He was bright, curious, and fascinated by his new life. And slowly, carefully, Vivian was learning how to be the mother she was always meant to be. "Hey, Viv," Leo asked, looking up at her with those bright green eyes. Her eyes. He had started calling her Viv, a small, tentative step toward trust. "Yes, Leo. Can we go see the turtles at the pond now?" Vivian smiled, a genuine warm expression that hadn't graced her face in 8 long years. She reached out, gently ruffling his unruly dark hair. "Of course we can, sweetheart. We can go anywhere you want." She stood up, taking her son's hand. They walked away from the fountain, disappearing into the vibrant crowd. Silas walked 3 paces behind, a silent guardian over an empire that finally had an heir. Vivian Croft had lost her past, but as she squeezed her son's hand, she knew she had finally secured her future. What would you do if you discovered the love of your life faked his death and stole your unborn child? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If Vivian's ruthless revenge gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping, real-life drama. Don't forget to ring the bell for notifications.